we play a game?
Why, yes. I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Not live from Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Radio. Geek Talk Radio, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for joining us. Like I said, this week is not live, so please don't call in or try to tweet me or anything during the show. Every now and then I do a pre-recorded show, but the show usually is a live radio show and then goes out as a podcast. Anyway, regardless of whether you're listening on 96.5 FM The Answer in Little Rock, or if you're listening via the online stream at 96.5fmtheanswer.com, or if you're listening by podcast or on Krypton Radio, kryptonradio.com is SciFi for your Wi-Fi. I'm so glad you're here. I got a great show today. I'm going to move really quick so we can get right into it. I'm talking with Mike Mearls today. Had the pleasure of talking with him a few weeks back and recorded this in conjunction with the release of the new D&D book, Tales from the Yawning Portal, which is coming out Tuesday, April 4th. Now, stores in the preferred, Wizards Network stores have already gotten it, but the major retail channels will get it on April 4th, this coming Tuesday. So we're going to get into that with Mike here in just one second. And Mike Mearls, if you don't know, is the dude. He's the main man for D&D at Wizards of the Coast. So a lot of the people know Chris Perkins, who is a writer and a designer and a well-known DM. Mike Mearls is the guy behind the scenes. Kind of think of him as the producer for D&D, among other things. So very glad to be talking with Mike, and we had a great conversation, which you'll hear here in a moment. Wanted to remind people about a couple of things before we get to that. First, I do have a review up. You can go to shaneplays.com, or you can go search on YouTube for Tales of the Yawning Portal review. And I have a video and a blog post review that kind of work together. You can either read the blog or watch the video. You don't have to do both, but they're kind of companions of my review of Tales from the Yawning Portal. Also, don't forget, and this is linked on the show notes as well as my review. Show notes are always at shaneplays.com. So Trollord Games, show sponsor Trollord Games, their Kickstarter for the 7th printing of the Castles and Crusades Player's Handbook is going on right now. So go over, support them, and take advantage of that and get yourself either a brand new for the first time or an updated version of the Castles and Crusades Player's Handbook. And now, without no further ado, Mike Mearls of D&D talking about the success of 5th edition and Tales from the Yawning Portal.
First of all, congratulations on 5th edition. I think it's a fantastic edition. I know you probably heard that a lot. But it's probably my favorite edition right after first edition. Of course, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so it has a near and dear place in my heart. But I think 5th edition is great.
Cool. Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear you're enjoying the game.
Yeah, it's good. I was going to ask if you could maybe just share, just in case somebody doesn't know who's listening, what your official role at Wizards of the Coast is these days.
Sure. So I am in charge of the creative team for Dungeons & Dragons. So I manage the writers and the game designers who produce the D&D role-playing game books. I also oversee the creation of the annual stories that we launch each year in September. And I also help with and also lead the development of the Forgotten Realms and any of our other settings or adventures or characters that we develop to sort of bring forward into the modern day from D&D's past.
Excellent. Okay. And what was your, what role did you play in 5th edition? Were you the lead designer? Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, we had two lead designers, myself and Jeremy Crawford. I was responsible for creating the core concept of 5th edition, putting together the process we used, like the open play test and things like that, and setting the direction for the design. It's big picture goals. It's sort of how we wanted to target a new generation of players, how we go about doing that. That was my half of the co-lead, and then Jeremy Crawford, he oversaw a lot of the implementation, the how we did things, in terms of putting together consistent vocabulary for the rules, how the book was structured, how things would work together in the game. So essentially you could think of it as I was the writer and he was the editor for the game, but that doesn't quite capture everything we did, and it's not a perfect analogy. But it also overlooks the many people who worked on the game with us. Chris Perkins worked on the monster manual. He led its creation. And then we had other game designers, Peter Lee, Rodney Thompson, and a bunch of other people who
right.
did a lot of the tactical implementation, taking my design direction and feedback and building on that to complete the game.
So last 5th edition question, because I do want to spend the majority of the time on Tales of the Yawning Portal, or from the Yawning Portal, which is a 5th edition project. You probably answered this before, but I want to ask for people who may, have not heard your answer on this before. Have you personally been surprised with how successful 5th edition has been?
Yes. I would be lying to say that the level of success we had was something we planned on. I think I had a good feeling, based on the playtest feedback, that the game was going to do well. But this is a couple order of magnitudes better than I think I was even at my most optimistic. It's been interesting to see D&D really be revived as a cultural phenomenon. As something that people, role-playing games is something that people are engaging with who otherwise maybe wouldn't. And that was always one of the goals of the design. We wanted to streamline the game. There's a lot of different ways you can do that, from rules complexity to how you present things and what you're putting in the game and how it's organized. But I think we hit a group of people that we had never even considered that we would be able to track back to the game or get into the game in the first place. And that's been really gratifying, because we felt from the beginning that, the concept of role-playing game is very powerful. The idea of a shared group storytelling game. And it's been very gratifying to see that even in an era of, VR is growing and, streaming video and consoles and PC gaming, there being more games out than ever before, that despite all those advances in technology, people still fundamentally really enjoy sitting around a table playing Dungeons and Dragons and games like it. So that feels really good, and I think in a lot of ways because, it's sort of this alchemy of why the success has been there. I think it's a combination of a bunch of different things that have all worked in our favor. And yeah, it's been great. I mean, it feels kind of funny to be like, it really is like it feels like the second golden age of D&D. We had the early 80s and now we have today.
Oh, definitely. We're definitely in not just a D&D, but a tabletop RPG and board game renaissance right now, which I'm just excited about. But that doesn't mean that, it's not just a rising tide has lifted D&D. I mean, D&D has been at the forefront. Well, I want to go ahead because I know that your time is limited, and I appreciate you very much for it. And the main reason I wanted to talk today was around Tales from the Yawning Portal, which is basically the spring 2017 D&D release, if I understand it correctly. Before I go into what I see about Tales from the Yawning Portal here, is there anything that you just want to say in general about it?
Yeah, really overall, it's a collection of 7 classic D&D adventures. And what you mentioned earlier about, a lot of new people coming into D&D, that was really the starting point for this book, for this product. We have these classic adventures that have stood the test of time, but it's not necessarily easy to find physical copies of them. You can always buy the PDFs from the DM's Guild, from dmsguild.com. But we really wanted to take some of those classic elements and create like a greatest hits album of D&D to help new players sort of catch up with people who've been playing for decades, like you and I.
Yeah, and there's some classics in here for sure. I'll just go through the list here, and this is actually from the announcement on dnd.wizards.com. It includes the following adventures. There's Against the Giant, Dead and Say, Forge of Fury, Hidden Shrine of, and I hope I don't mispronounce this, Temoikin?
Temoikin.
Yeah, Temoikin. That one I have not played. I've heard of it, and when the announcement for this product came out, a lot of people seem to be really excited about that one. So I'm curious to learn more. Sunless Citadel, And then, I mean, these are the very definition of classics here. The Tomb of Horrors and White Plume Mountain. So, there's a good spread of types of adventures in here as well. And so these are all 5th edition converted, right? So, I mean, they're ready to go with 5th edition. How many, have y'all calculated what you think, how many hours of playtime there is here with these 7 adventures?
Yeah, if you're sort of taking a rough estimate, it's actually probably more content than an adventure like Out of the Abyss or Storm King's Thunder, because this is just adventures. You don't have things like we'll often describe, like a location or give you information on a region and what the different towns and the setting for the adventure. This is just pure dungeons and adventures you can drop into your campaign. So if you start with the Sunless Citadel at first level and play through all these adventures and actually like maybe somehow survive the Tomb of Horrors, that's about 14 levels of play, which is
right.
In terms of time. Now I'm probably gonna get the math wrong here, but
right.
It's like about 4, 8. That's about 100 hours of play, give or take. So
right.
yeah,
well, that's
That's about 2 years of play. No, that's about like 6 or so months of play if you're to play for 4 hours.
Right. So, in my game store, we get to play 2.5 hours a week, just the way because people are playing after work and stuff like that. So, it could be even longer. I'm excited about this. I am curious because it's obvious that the D&D team at Wizards of the Coast, and by obvious, I mean, not everything's obvious to me anyway, I'm assuming, and you can get in trouble in assuming stuff, that you're trying to not just offer up adventures, you've had, Princes of the Apocalypse, you've had, Rise of Tiamat, you've had, Storm King's Thunder, you've had Out of the Abyss, you've had Curse of Strahd. So you've offered a lot of, like, here's a campaign. Here's an adventure. Your last 2 releases, you did Volo's Guide to Monsters, which I thought was super cool, and I was fortunate enough to get the one with the limited edition cover. It was a monster manual, but it was also a source book on, I think, 7 types of monsters, like here's more about their culture and how to play them and how they live and stuff like that. So that was a slight departure. And then now this release is, 7 adventures in one. But are you a little nervous that people might, not be as receptive to this, as they would be to like a standard campaign?
Yeah, no, I'm always nervous people are going to dislike something we did. So that always goes without saying. But yeah, this was sort of based on feedback we've been receiving. We regularly have surveys on our website, that we ask people questions. How's your D&D game going? What are some of the products that you want to see? And we saw a lot of desire for shorter adventures. And so we thought about, that's kind of was the initial spark of this idea, like why not do a greatest hits album? But we also knew we wanted to do something that had like a range of levels. Like, if we did a book with, say, 6 adventures that you could just start a campaign with, that's probably not as useful as offering something that really covers a lot of levels, that goes beyond, just levels 1 to 3 repeated a bunch of times. We also saw people wanted higher level content. So that was one of the ideas too, was to include a couple of adventures that could be aimed at characters of 10th level and higher. So that's really where like Against the Giants and Tomb of Horrors comes in. You can complete, say, Storm King's Thunder, by the end of which you'll be around 11th or 12th level, and then you can then just go ahead and play Against the Giants and then Tomb of Horrors. So yeah, it's really driven by seeing what people want and trying to make sure we have a variety of products.
Right.
When we first launched 5th edition, we wanted to kind of like fill the back catalog of the role playing game with a nice selection of level like 1 to 10, 1 to 15 campaigns. And we still see demand for those. But now that we have the we have We've done 4 of those so far. No, 5 of those so far. Actually, I'm probably going to keep saying like I have 6, whatever. There's enough out there that we don't necessarily need to do 2 of those each year. We can start being a little more, having some more variety in what we're offering. We always try to think of D&D as not just the next book we're publishing, but what the entire shelf of books looks like, at a game store or even just on your shelf if you're collecting all of them. That there's a nice variety. And so I think we're kind of at the phase now where there's, if you want to run a complete campaign, pre-published campaign, you have options and you're probably not playing quickly enough that you need more than one of those a year. So that's kind of where we're settling now and trying to find other types of products to do to give people content they need, beyond that stuff. And again, a lot of that's driven by what we see people asking for through our surveys and in other venues.
A lot of gamers now, just to give context, if someone's new to tabletop role-playing games or D&D, back in the 80s, 70s, or maybe late 70s, pretty much throughout the 80s and early 90s, you could go into a game store, and it was a lot like a comic book store. There were like racks of adventures you could choose from. This adventure is, whatever, for levels, whatever. And so there, it wasn't necessarily always a complete campaign book. So, I'm just saying because you were kind of speaking, people were like, hey, we want some shorter adventures or whatever. And now I know that modular adventure type of market is now being served by the DMs Guild. But it's nice to have some of this stuff, like in a hardback format too. Yeah, it sounds like you're going to do we're definitely going to do one kind of campaign adventure release per year, but then maybe we'll also do a more of a different type of content release. So you had Volo's Guide to Monsters, and now you've got Tales from the Yawning Portal. Was the feedback from Volo's, did people seem receptive to that? Overall, like I said, I thought Volo's was very cool, and everybody that I know that looked at it really liked it a lot. But did you feel that, people were receptive to you kind of deviating from just offering up a campaign?
Yeah, people seem to, Volo's has done very well, both in terms of reviews and in terms of sales. And we knew, it's another good example of that was something where we had seen people were asking for more monsters. And so that was driven in part, and I think it's actually a good illustration of, we're listening to what people want, but we're not just doing exactly what people expect. Kind of one of our rules of thumb is we're trying to avoid duplicating products that appeared in prior editions. So rather than just do a monster manual, we thought, well, it seems like, as D&D has been growing, the audience is getting younger, and people also seem to have more of a desire for story material than in prior editions. So that was kind of our opportunity to go, well, what if we did these really nice, concise, overviews of things like orcs, gnolls, and stuff like that. And it's been very gratifying to see people react to that. And so I think that's kind of our approach. We try to find things that people want, but then deliver it in a way that is not quite what they expect. But if we're doing our job right, it's an upgrade on what maybe they would have thought as the simplest expression of the idea.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's cool. I like the spread of types of adventures in here. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, sometimes I want a very rich narrative, choice and consequences type of adventure, that is more sandboxy and that, that's more in vogue these days than it necessarily was back in, say, the 80s. But I also sometimes I want the adventure where I'm just going to kick down the door and see if I can survive the dungeon and get some loot while I'm at it. So I'm actually really pleased that you included Tomb of Horrors and White Plume Mountain in here. Because some people have characterized these as almost funhouse adventures where they don't necessarily always make logical sense, but it's an incredibly satisfying challenge to try to work your way through it. And so I'm really glad that you represented that kind of adventure, which really typified D&D or AD&D or whatever, decades ago.
And that's a good place for a pause. We'll be back with more from Mike Mearls of D&D and Tales from the Yawning Portal right after this quick break on Shane Plays Geek Talk Radio. Comic book lovers, visit thewildstars.com today. From the mind of author and comic book industry expert Michael Tierney, it's not just a comic book, it's a comic book novel. The Wild Stars is sci-fi and so much more. Learn the explanations behind UFOs and space gods. This isn't the Twilight Zone. This is the region of the Milky Way galaxy known as the Wild Stars. We guarantee you've never read anything like it. The complete comic book novel took 20 years to tell, with one reviewer noting, the story of the Wild Stars stretches ambitiously across space and time, from small-town murders to the destruction of planets, with every event given multiple layers of meaning. If you haven't read The Wild Stars, you're missing out. Visit thewildstars.com today. The die is cast. Plunge into worlds of fantastic adventure where dragons lie and the undead stalk the shades of your mind's imagines. Where creatures of legend plunder wealth through the horror of their passage. Monsters grim and foul hold the ecstasy of gold and the renown of glory. All this and more awaits you and your friends in the unlimited, fantastic world of the Castles and Crusades role-playing game from Trollord Games. Visit your friendly local game store or Trollord.com to get your copy today. A rules-light, adaptable game that has stood the test of time. 12 years in constant publication with no new additions, Castles and Crusades is the original, easy-to-play attribute check system. Join us and unleash your imagination. Visit your friendly local game store or Trollord.com to get your copy of Castles and Crusades today. Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays. Hey, welcome back to Shane Plays Geek Talk Radio, a journey into the things we love. We now return to our discussion with D&D's Mike Mearls about the new D&D book, Tales from the Yawning Portal.
Stuff. So was it hard internally at Wizards of the Coast to narrow down? Was there a lot of arm wrestling and discussion, or did it seem pretty obvious which adventures to include?
No, it was tricky because there are a lot of classic adventures. And then when you're putting together something, this idea of a greatest hits album, you always want to include a couple deep cuts, things that maybe people didn't expect, but that are interesting. So the tricky part was also getting a sense of, hey, if you started playing D&D in 3rd edition, you're going to have a different sense of what's classic than if you started playing in 1st edition.
Absolutely.
To me, Forge of Fury, it's like, oh yeah, that was the 2nd adventure for 3rd edition, but there's a lot of players for whom that's like a really a classic adventure that they remember. It's one of the first things they played when they started playing back in 2001.
It's almost like they're keeping the Borderlands. Because,
exactly.
back in the day, everybody started on keeping the Borderlands. Yeah.
Yep. And then part of it, too, was thinking, we wanted this nice spread of levels, so, what's the best adventure to have for low-level play? So do you do keep on the Borderlands? Or In Search of the Unknown is another, low-level classic adventure. It's like, well, but that one was like a training module for adventure for DMs. The idea was, they would stock the dungeon themselves. So it's probably not the best choice for this product because, we'd have to put the monsters in the adventure, and things like that. And so, yeah, that was probably the hardest part because you could easily imagine, should Village of Hamlet be in here? Because that's another classic one. But then it's like, well, it's part of, Temple of Elemental Evil, so do you want to try to fit the entirety of that adventure in here, and things like that.
Right.
And then even with...
And I mean,
Oh, sorry.
I was just saying, and Temple of Elemental Evil was kind of revisited in a way with Princes of the Apocalypse. Not the exact adventure, but, it was kind of dealing with elemental evil or whatever, so...
Oh, so you see, and that's another thing to look at. Like, if we've done a similar adventure, on one hand you could argue, well, you shouldn't just, you've already done Elemental Evil, why do it again? But then the counter argument is, well, you've done Elemental Evil, so why not show people what inspired it?
True. There's always at least more than one way to slice it. So
exactly,
especially when it comes to like people's favorites and what they want to see redone. So.
Oh yeah, and now the thing we always keep in mind as well, if this product does well, we can always look at doing another one, right?
Right.
So that was also kind of the thing, like, okay, we don't have to worry about we'll ever have, like there could be more tales from the Yawning Portal, things like that. So
it'd be great to have they may still do this, but for years and years, every year they came out with it. Now that's what I call music, and it was like the top hits of that year. To have now that's what I call D&D every year, and these adventures coming out. So something like that. That'd be a lot of fun. But how difficult was it to convert these to 5th edition, and are there any substantial changes? Like maybe to make it a little bit surprising to people, or is it basically the same adventure but it's 5th edition?
It's kind of like all the above. Like some of the adventures required a lot more work because, especially the older adventures, when the system for AD&D really relied on the dungeon master making a lot of ad hoc decisions at the table. That also extended to designing adventures, where if you wanted to add some weird effect or it had some kind of situation the rules didn't cover, adventures back then would usually just introduce unique rules. And so there are a few cases where it wasn't just as simple as converting an encounter or a section of the dungeon over. You also had to figure out, okay, how do we use these rules here that are trying to make something weird happen? But our goal was always, when we thought of the conversion, was to preserve the feel of the original adventure, because the feeling is this is a greatest hits album. Give people within 5th edition rules the same play experience they would have had back in the day. So, if you play Tomb of Horrors, doesn't matter which edition you play, it feels like a similar adventure. The story behind it's the same, the experience behind it's the same. While still then working within the 5th ed rules. So in Tomb of Horrors, for instance, I'm flipping through it now, where there's a Sphere of Annihilation, it just uses the Sphere of Annihilation from the 5th ed DMG, right? It just uses an artifact.
But there's still the mouth. Is it White Plume Mountain or is it Tomb of Horrors where there's that big gaping mouth that you don't want to stick your arm in? I can't remember.
Yeah, that's Tomb of Horrors.
So it's still a bad idea to do that, I take it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. I have a special place in my heart for those Funhouse adventures. They just captured a spirit of the time where it was just more about exploration and, puzzle solving and it didn't have to make logical sense. And I understand where people are like, hey, I want my dungeon to make logical sense and I want the ecology. I get all that and those are fun, but there's just something really crazy about Tomb of Horrors and White Plume Mountain style adventures where it's just a series of challenges, So it's just test yourself against it and see what happens. I love stuff like that. But, a good, rich, well thought out narrative adventure can be equally as satisfying. So, okay, well, if I've got just a few questions here from people out in social media land, if you're up for some of these, and that would pretty much, So, okay, so here we go. All right, this is from Entropic Adventurer, that's at ORIOMH on Twitter. It's funny, I got 2 questions in a row about Tomb of Horrors that are almost the opposite of each other. So, Entropic Adventurer says, will Tomb of Horrors be a little more sporting for the players than the Gygax version? Because, the original Tomb of Horrors was not very sporting. You could die very easily.
Yeah. So, it's kind of like a middle path. The trick to it is, because Tomb there are a lot of things, if you just did the wrong thing, your character just died. And so what we wanted to do was preserve that feel, but also make sure that if you played 5th edition, you didn't feel like the adventure was cheating by subverting the rules. So here's two examples from the Tomb of Horrors. I was flipping through the book and I was trying to think because I was just talking about Tomb. But so, for instance, if you're familiar with the adventure, there is one trap where you're walking down a hallway and the floor pivots So it suddenly, like in front of you, plunges downward. So it's a steep slide that you go tumbling down toward a pool of lava. And in the original adventure, if I remember correctly, if you trigger the trap, and there's some warnings, like this, it's not like you just walking down the hallway, then this happens randomly. There are some things in hints and clues of what's coming up. But if you misread those hints and clues, you trigger the trap, you just die. Well, we know in 5th edition, since we have rules for things like strength checks, the athletic skill, acrobatics, that trap will still kill you if you succumb to it, but there are things like, okay, when the trap triggers, you don't just instantly die, you get a chance to make a strength check. And the strength check determines how far down the slide you go tumbling. You get another chance to try to catch yourself, and if you fail that, then you do tumble into the flames.
Same danger. Sounds like same danger with slightly more modern sensibilities on how your players can react to the danger.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're just thinking players are kind of used to in 5th edition. Oh, I would have a chance to try to slow myself down. We have a rule a bit more comprehensive. But now, on the other hand, there's a trap later on where there's a crown you can find, and the crown interacts with a couple of different magic items. And if you trigger the wrong interaction, your character is just destroyed, and we just preserve it.
Okay.
Because, look, in this case, there's no mechanic of play where you feel like, I touch this item to this item, what happens? Well, it just happens, right? There's no you would get a check or something. No, this is just something that occurs. So that's typically what we tried to do. Yeah, so if you played 5th edition when you're playing the conversion of Tomb of Horrors, you don't feel like you're suddenly playing a different game where checks and saving throws don't work the way they worked in 5th. Instead, but you are still getting at the spirit of Tomb of Horrors. So it's not like we didn't take this, it's not like a one-size-fits-all thing where it's like, okay, everything that was instant death we need to moderate. It was more just, if you were to take the situation and run it in 5th edition, what would the players expect mechanically? How would they expect things to function? So.
Right. Okay. Well, cool. Because it would be very jarring to just suddenly drop people into 1st edition abilities.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, and then another thing too is you can buy the 1st edition version as print on demand or as a PDF from the DMsGuild.com. So if you are hey, I really want that. I mean, it kind of ties into our overall thing where it's all D&D. So if you're just I really want to play a 1st edition game because I like that flavor, then we play a 1st edition game. That's great. That's exactly what we want you to do. So
cool. All right. So on the flip side, Zoltar Sage Advice, who is of course Sage Advice D&D on Twitter, asked, and this is kind of funny because it's kind of the flip side of this other question. He said, will Tomb of Horrors be harder than the last conversion, which was D&D Next in Dungeon Magazine number 213? Are you familiar with that version to compare it to?
It's been a long time since I've looked at it, but you know what I can do, because I have my iPad right here, I can fill some time, and I will look up, see if I can just grab that off of our server here. Yeah. I can and what I'll do is I'll do a quick comparison of the two.
Okay.
Let's see, here we go. Because we have this technology in our hands.
Yeah, if only there was an interconnected series of networked computers that would let us look things up.
Okay, let's see. This is the view. Oh, I see here. It's on drivethrurpg.com. The DM's Guide.
Yeah.
It might be a little bit longer than we have because now I have to find my password and everything. Things where I'm looking at it and I just happen to have I need to grab my password for OneDrive for one, but I can't remember it because that's on my PC and I'm here on my iPad.
Right. Well, fair enough. Okay, so next question is from Alpha Stream on Twitter. He said 39 years for some of these, talking about the age. I think the oldest one, I was looking it up, is Tomb of Horrors. That's 1978. So I think that's the oldest one in here.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. Some of the first adventures for D&D were very high level.
Yeah, they really were, because that was written for levels 10 through 14. If I remember right, I think Tomb of Horrors was originally written as a tournament module, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, so, you would actually be rated on how well you did and compared to other groups. So, I think that's how it worked anyway. I never actually got to do it myself. Okay, so now this question's already kind of been touched on, but maybe you want to add something to it. He said, how much has adventure writing changed? And how do you strike a balance between preserving and updating classics? So you've already touched on that quite a bit, but, if you want to add anything else, feel free.
Yeah, I think the biggest change has been, I think that in the 70s and into the early 80s, really before Ravenloft, I think designers often thought of adventure design as being a bit, I don't know if adversarial is maybe too strong a word, but there was this real sense that you were pitting the designers, clever ideas versus the player's ability to kind of come up with counter ideas of their own. You see there was
definitely a lot of that going on. Yeah, I don't know if it was antagonistic, but it was definitely adversarial at times.
And I think you see this idea, especially like in Tomb of Horrors, right, where it's more logic puzzles. It's more, how do I fit these three things together to overcome this? How do I sort of like read this hint or this cryptic poem and extract what is this hinting at? Riddles, things like that. And I think that was just more, and that's not a blanket statement. You think of things like Keep on the Borderlands and stuff. It's more just a classic your dungeon location to explore. But I also think exploration was a bigger part of the game too. This idea of trying to find you map the dungeon and then you notice, hey, there's this one area over here where there's a big block that we haven't been able to explore. We haven't found any doors into it. Oh, maybe there's a secret door over there, so let's go find it. But again, kind of this idea of challenging more the player's problem-solving abilities.
You said I think it's natural?
Yeah, it's kind of natural at the time, because when you think about it, you had this sense of, people hadn't played role-playing games before. So I think this idea of having a very distinct, the drama behind the game, it really... I think it was something that DMs assumed, adventure designers assumed the players and the dungeon master would kind of take care of that. That was kind of like the context they would create or the personality you'd create for your character. And that adventures didn't necessarily go out of their way to support that. They more focused on just giving you these interesting situations that you can then, the group would do whatever they wanted with.
And that's a good place for a pause. We'll be back with more from Mike Mearls of D&D and Tales from the Yawning Portal right after this quick break on Shane Plays Geek Talk Radio. Comic book lovers, visit thewildstars.com today. From the mind of author and comic book industry expert Michael Tierney, it's not just a comic book, it's a comic book novel. The Wild Stars is sci-fi and so much more. Learn the explanations behind UFOs and space gods. This isn't the Twilight Zone. This is the region of the Milky Way galaxy known as the Wild Stars. We guarantee you've never read anything like it. The complete comic book novel took 20 years to tell, with one reviewer noting, the story of the Wild Stars stretches ambitiously across space and time, from small-town murders to the destruction of planets, with every event given multiple layers of meaning. If you haven't read The Wild Stars, you're missing out. Visit thewildstars.com today. The die is cast. Plunge into worlds of fantastic adventure, where dragons lie, and the undead stalk the shades of your mind's imagines. Where creatures of legend plunder wealth through the horror of their passage. Monsters grim and foul hold the ecstasy of gold and the renown of glory. All this and more awaits you and your friends in the unlimited, fantastic world of the Castles and Crusades role-playing game from Trollord Games. Visit your friendly local game store or Trollord.com to get your copy today. A rules-light, adaptable game that has stood the test of time. 12 years in constant publication with no new additions, Castles and Crusades is the original, easy-to-play attribute check system. Join us and unleash your imagination. Visit your friendly local game store or Trollord.com to get your copy of Castles and Crusades today. Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays. Hey, welcome back to Shane Plays Geek Talk Radio, a journey into the things we love. We now return to our discussion with D&D's Mike Mearls about the new D&D book, tales from the Yawning Portal.
Well, and you talked about mapping. Used to literally, there was usually one player who was the mapper, and the DM would describe the room or the tunnel or whatever, and they would draw the map. That's changed a lot. Now, there's probably some groups that still do that, but I usually DM. I usually just end up sketching the map out for them. So it's
I started doing that too.
Things have changed. Yeah, things have definitely changed.
You would see dungeon maps drawn. In Search of the Unknown, B1 was kind of notorious for this. The map was intentionally made very crowded and with weird angles and corners to make it harder to map.
As an element of gameplay. Yeah, because it was so assumed that somebody would be mapping. Absolutely. It just really shows how things change. And I can look back on that nostalgically and go, oh, that was so cool we used to map, but I wonder how fun it really was. I don't remember.
Yeah, we were always lazy about mapping, and I think it's something where, that style of play, I think is obviously it's still there. It's just, I think it's more, adventures have become more diverse. Like, you have more ways to write adventures, rather than it being like, this is kind of what you expect to get out of a published adventure.
All right, and then Zoltar asked another Tomb of Horrors, and I think you've already answered this, but I'll see if you want to add anything to it. He said, will Tomb of Horrors have the save or die feature? And if not, more 5e philosophy, how many hit points will take the die?
Good question.
I'm
trying to find something that just didn't outright killed you. So let me see if I can find something.
Yeah.
I think one of the false doors would just kill you if you... Let's see what it says here. So it looks like what we're typically doing is if something is a save or die because something was physically hitting you. So in the event, again, if you're going to play the adventure, block your ears. But there is like a false entryway that if you trigger it, it collapses on you and does damage rather than just killing you. And again, I think that's a kind of a thing where in first edition players are kind of used to that. But in 5th edition, players are, it's more something where, well, wait a second, I have 100 hit points. This thing is just hitting me over the head. Why is it just instantly killing me as opposed to just doing a bunch of damage?
Gotcha.
Now, I could be mistaken. It's also possible that, let me see if I have a PDF of the original Tomb of Horrors here. I have my tablet out. I'm kind of going through our sort of pre-press archives here. I can't remember if that actual trap actually just kills you outright. But I think I'm 75% sure it did kill you outright. So definitely, what we would typically do is kind of going back to the example of the crown. Things would kill you outright if look, that makes narrative sense. You've activated the thing in your head, it just kills you. But again, we would try to think, well, how would 5th edition express this? And rather than, in first edition, you didn't necessarily have a rule to cover all of those, situations and things like that. So there are things where, the falling ceiling, it does damage rather than just instantly killing you. Because the idea being, well, there are ways, in 5th edition you could mitigate that. You could cast a spell and dodge it, things like that you didn't have back.
Right. Yeah, insta-kill was much more prevalent back in the day. I know I'm sounding like a massive grognard on this call. Okay, so just a couple of remaining questions here. Bob Huss, who is Coyote670 on Twitter, asked, did they revise treasure and magic item amounts to 5e standards, or did they leave them as they were?
I believe we kept them close to as they were. There are some cases where a magic item might not exist in 5th edition, and then we just had to decide, is this item worth giving page count over, page space over to convert it, or is it too narrow or limited, or is there a next best option that we could drop into the adventure?
Gotcha.
But we did.
But for the most part,
yeah, it follows the original adventure. And part of that was, again, just, this idea that if you played the original and there was a specific magic item you found, kind of letting players recreate that rather than trying to go through and make a change that might feel kind of arbitrary to someone who's like, well, wait a second, in the original adventure, the ogre here in Forge of Fury was, had a +1 rapier in his treasure hoard. Why is it gone? So it's just one of those things that's just, we just kind of confuse people.
Okay, that makes sense. And then Heath Belden asks, Will these be useful examples of how DMs can convert other classic titles to 5e on their own? I'm assuming the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, I think it'll actually be really useful for people because, it'll give you the chance to, especially those more weirder kind of like, here's a little subsystem someone created for this adventure, give you a chance to really see those and get a sense of, okay, here's how I can approach that. Here's how I can preserve the feel of this while still using fifth ed mechanics in a way that people go, okay, I recognize that. That's what it would feel like in fifth ed, if I wanted to replicate that kind of effect or that kind of threat.
But there's not like a foreword or an appendix or anything like that says here's how you convert the adventures.
No, because like I said earlier, what we found was each adventure was fairly idiosyncratic in how it might get converted. So because there are things like you might say, and say a third edition adventure, where a lot of times you'd find monsters that had levels in a character class. You could either say, is it important that this ogre is a fighter, or can I just use the existing ogre stat block and increase its hit dice? It is more art than science, because you just have to kind of look at it and go like, well, what's the design intent of this creature? A good example would be, let's say you had an ogre who was also a druid. And you could look at it and go, what's really interesting about this monster, you think of it as an NPC, is that, okay, this ogre, she's a nature priest, and she's described in the adventure it's important if she's going to transform into an animal and do something, or transform into a bat and keep an eye on the players. So you'd more think, okay, maybe this is something where we'd want to create a new stat block, and make sure that shape-shifting is an important part of it. But maybe we don't need a DM doesn't need to track a full set of spells, because really in the adventure, when the ogre attacks you, the ogre druid attacks you, so you'd more think, okay, maybe this is something where we'd want to create a new stat block, and make sure that shape-shifting is an important part of it. But maybe we don't need a DM doesn't need to track a full set of spells, because really in the adventure, when the ogre attacks you, the ogre druid attacks you, she really relies on her melee attack.
Okay. Yeah, so it's more art than science. Which D&D, all role-playing games, as mathematical and rules-based as they are, there's a lot of art rather than science to it, Yeah, because Okay, so here's the final question I have. I'm ending with this one on purpose because I read something today that excited me that I wanted to give you a chance to highlight. If you have anything else you want to add, feel free. But Chilladan Stormbro, who is What I Did There on Twitter, said, is there anything birthright related on the horizon? Great setting in its own right, even without the realm stuff. Now, I don't know if there's anything birthright related or not, but it led to, I read that you had said that there would be guidelines in Tales from the Yawning Portal on Dragonlance or, Eberron or, bringing these adventures into these different settings. So if you wanted to, I wanted to give you a moment to speak to that.
Oh yeah, we definitely expect for a book like Tales where you have a lot of, we have new players picking it up, but also a lot of long-time D&D players. Because the adventures, we didn't want to do something where it's okay, now it's official, Tomb of Horrors is in the Forgotten Realms and here's where it is. We wanted to give a canonical location. We wanted to preserve the feeling that these are dungeons and adventures that can be played in almost any setting, and it's really up to the DM to decide, here's where I want to place this for my campaign. So we want to preserve that feel, and so we included tips and suggestions for Forgotten Realms, for Eberron, for Greyhawk, and for Dragonlance. And then also it extends to Dead and Fey, which is of the adventures one that's very canonically located in the Forgotten Realms. It's beneath Fey. Giving the DM advice, hey, if you want to bring this over into Greyhawk, here's where you could locate it, things like that. Because again, the idea was we want to make these adventures as portable as possible. So even though we don't have an official 5e book, say, on Greyhawk yet, we do have all that source material on dmsguild.com, and things. So we know when we do surveys and ask people what campaigns you're playing, we do see people playing Dragonlance, playing Greyhawk, playing Eberron. The Realms is our most popular campaign, but the other ones, there are players who are still, who are in those worlds and using them.
Okay, so nothing birthright specific, and I know that you don't want to talk too much about advanced stuff, but is there any ray of hope here for Chilladan Stormbro on birthright stuff anytime in the next, say, decade?
The next decade, we're looking at all the settings, and so I have nothing to announce, but I can definitely say that we are aware that people like our classic settings, and we are aware that if we could bring them back to the world, we think people would be very happy, and we like making people happy. So
I probably hear personally, now I'm a big Dragonlance nerd, huge Dragonlance nerd, but probably the two settings that I hear the most people mention is Eberron, which I never personally have played in, but I know a lot of people like it a lot. And then which one was it where you were like in the desert? Dark Sun. Yeah, I hear Dark Sun mentioned a lot. So which crazy stuff. But all right, well, Mike, man, I really appreciate you. This has been a fantastic discussion. I'm looking forward to Tales from the Yawning Portal. Will be out April 4th, I believe. Certain stores in the preferred network, I can't remember the exact, I think might get it a little earlier, certain game stores.
Yeah, if your store takes part in the Wizards Play Network, they have the opportunity to sell books about like 10 to 14 days ahead of the mass market release date. Market would be Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and non-Wizards Play Network stores.
So, and that'll be April 4th. I'm excited. All right, is there anything else you'd like to mention or whatever that you didn't get a chance to?
No, just we're really excited. I personally, I have to admit, I hope this product, people really like it and enjoy it, because I would love to compile a second volume.
I think that'd be fantastic. So, and I think it's cool that, the whole team, not just yourself, but, yourself included, is, somewhat taking risks by trying to do different stuff, and not just, pumping out the same old or whatever, I think that's really cool. So, cool. And I think that, it's been part of, the success of, 5th edition is, just having kind of a different mindset.
And that's it for our discussion with Mike Mearls of D&D and their new Tales from the Yawning Portal book. That's also it for this week's show, but I will leave you with the bad joke of the week, and I take no responsibility for any mental damage this may cause. What kind of music do mummies listen to? Rap music, of course. Ha! Oh, sorry. Anyway, we'll catch you next time on Shane Plays Geek Talk Radio. Thanks for listening.
Doctor? I'm here. Can't you see me?
What's that noise?
End of the tape. It ran out about 30 seconds ago.
I'm here now. Can't you see me?
I sent it to its room. This is its room.
Are you my mummy?
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.